Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
I'm Dion Mitchell here with Mehul Anjaria, and today we are excited to present the second episode in our series on criminal justice warriors. Last time we talked about Ice-T, and today we are going in an entirely different direction by featuring Kim Kardashian West. She's another great example of the intersection of the media and the justice system.
To many people, in fact, this might be somewhat of a controversial choice. But we're not going to cover the celebrity aspect of Kim Kardashian West. I think everybody's well aware of Keeping Up with the Kardashians and her beauty line and all of that. Instead, we're going to highlight her recent work in getting very big results in criminal justice reform.
Yeah, this is crazy because, you think criminal justice reform and Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and you never think that those there would be a mesh point between those two. It's very clear that she's just not waving a magic wand. She works with boots on the ground organizations and lets her celebrity and massive audience via social media to affect real change.
Absolutely. And, it might seem out of left field that, well, gee, all of a sudden Kim Kardashian West, should we just call her Kim from now on to shorten it? All right.
Everybody knows who Kim Kardashian West is. So if you're listening to this, it's Kim.
Yeah, so, I was going to say, hey, maybe it seems to some this is out of left field. But, Dion, I always say this, and I like to tease us a little bit, but we're a little bit older now. And so the first Kardashian we became aware of was not Kim or Khloe or Kourtney, but it was Robert Kardashian. Agreed?
Yeah, this is well before any of their fame started to go into the public bloodstream. Yeah, I mean, he was the centerpiece, obviously, for the O.J. Simpson case.
So let's go back to 1995. Let's talk about Robert Kardashian, and let's talk a little bit about the environment that Kim grew up in. So Robert, he was an attorney. He was also O.J. Simpson's friend and his attorney. So when O.J. got into, shall we say, a little bit of trouble, Robert Kardashian actually reactivated his law license so that he could participate in O.J.'s defense team. And, in an interview that Kim gave with Van Jones, she was actually describing how the O.J. Simpson dream team, that is Johnny Cochran, Shawn Holley, Robert Shapiro, all the big guns would actually meet at the Kardashian household. So she had a first row view of the defense team of O.J. Simpson. And as a matter of fact, she was saying that a lot of the case documents were actually kept at her house. So as a young girl on the weekends, she would sneak a peek and look at all the crime scene information and investigation reports and all of that kind of stuff. So really, in a sense, you might say that criminal justice is in her DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I think for the younger audience, they just don't know her background and what she grew up in. But this, really in hindsight makes perfect sense. If you're growing up in the father that's a well-known attorney and worked on the O.J. Simpson case, yeah, this makes perfect sense.
Right.
Now, you've had some experience working with a few of the attorneys on the O.J. Simpson team.
Yeah, I did. I remember one time I gave a talk down in San Diego with the late Judge Woody Clark. I was actually on a panel. It was me, him, and one other gentleman. And that was a highlight for me because Woody Clark was one of the special prosecutors that they brought in for the DNA in O.J. And then I remember... of course, I did a case with Robert Shapiro. We talked about that, and that was in the O.J. courtroom. And I was actually struggling to remember.
How surreal. I'm sorry to interrupt, but how surreal was that?
That was really, really crazy. It's just hard to believe, 20-some years later, kind of back in the same environment with, at least one of the same attorneys. And then, I'm struggling to remember there was another attorney. Oh, Bob Blazier. Okay, he was another serology expert. And I don't know, this was 10, 15 years ago. I actually went up to Sacramento and I gave a training for him and some of his attorneys. So that was really cool. That was, again, a little bit of a geek out for me, just marrying my present with the history.
Gosh, that's it's amazing, the intersections of that case and how many tentacles go out, and even obviously connection to you and our company, and then her background. This is it's really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But let's get into the current topic and the work that she's doing now. We can't forget that photo that she sent out posing with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, advocating for clemency for Alice Marie Johnson. So just so the listeners, know something about that case, why don't you break it down for us and tell us a little bit about the Alice case?
Yeah, this was kind of the cornerstone of Kim's advocacy and really what started it out in terms of high profile. And Alice Marie Johnson, why her and how did Kim become involved? Well, there was a social media posting from a website called Mike.com, and it was actually a video of Alice Marie Johnson kind of telling her story. This is how Kim Kardashian found out about the case, through social media. So basically, Alice Marie Johnson had been in prison for about 21 years, and she was LWOP, which means life without parole. Okay, so what's interesting about her case? She's a nonviolent first-time drug offender, and she never actually dealt drugs. She was sort of a go-between and facilitated communication to make these deals happen. So yeah, she was involved, but it's not like she was a major player. And what's really interesting is how she got her LWOP sentence. So she had 10 co-conspirators, and at trial, they all testified against her. Okay, well, that happens, right? But Alice gets LWOP, and do you want to guess what the co-conspirators got? Anywhere between 0 to 10 years in prison. So what do you think about that?
Well, why do you think that in other words, from what I've read about the case, she was nowhere near the big fish, which
right.
is why do you think that they wanted to make her an example? I mean, she was, like I said, the lowest person on the totem pole.
Well, is it that they wanted to make her an example, or is it that these 10 people said, hey, you know what? Let's team up. Let's throw it down on Alice so that we can get our sentences cut.
So part of there was almost like a little bit of a defense conspiracy for them to basically all work together to, kind of throw her under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, in these plea deals, there could be incentives to, I don't want to say lie, but I'll say lie. You may be incentivizing getting what you want out of a particular informant.
In these situations where there's a lot of defendants, it's sad to say, but the lesson there is be the first one to turn. When the music stops, you'll be in her situation.
Well, this will be a theme we'll talk about in some of these other cases, and the injustices is that people who are marginally involved with the crime, who should go down and should go to jail, but why is it that they are getting the major sentence out of the whole group? And we'll talk about another case where this happened as well. But let's get back to Alice's background. How did she get in that jam? Because all of this is important, right? When you're looking at who should we give clemency, right? Let's look at what was their character before the crime. Let's look at the crime itself, and then let's look at how they were in jail and what kind of risk they might pose. So Alice Marie Johnson got pregnant when she was 15, but despite that, she ended up going to college. In the late 1990s, this is when trouble started. She had been a manager at FedEx for about a decade, and she lost her job due to a gambling addiction. Right around that same time period, she got divorced. 1991, she goes broke. Year later, her son dies in an accident. So at this point, she's rock bottom, down on her luck. So she becomes involved in this drug deal. And basically, it was a cocaine operation. They were transporting cocaine to Memphis for distribution. So we already talked about her trial. She gets LWOP. So while she's in prison, though, she's a model prisoner. She took every possible class there was to try to better herself. She was a playwright. She mentored the other women. And as a matter of fact, and this is how Kim actually saw her, because she was such a good prisoner, she would actually make videos that would be sent to Ivy League schools and big corporations like Google. So that tells you the quality of the person after the arrest. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say what's amazing about that, and part of the research for this episode, was she didn't think she was getting out. So this isn't someone trying to, prep themselves for a parole that may be in the near future. She was just doing this because that's the type of character she had.
That's a great point. That shows that those actions were genuine. So through these videos, this is how Kim Kardashian West gets involved. So she sees this and she's moved. So she contacts her lawyer, who's Shawn Holley, who you may know. Shawn Holley was on the Dream Team on the OJ defense. She was working with Johnny Cochran, but you may know her for some of her more recent cases. She's a celebrity attorney. She represented Lindsay Lohan, Reggie Bush, and she's pretty incredible herself. I saw her talk at Southwestern Law School about 2-3 years ago. And as a matter of fact, she was at the Women's March in L.A., and she came over to Southwestern, where she graduated from, and gave a speech. And her background, as I recall, is that she started out with the public defender. I believe she caught the eye of Johnny Cochran, started working with him. OJ case hits, rest is history. So I was reading an article in the Southern California Super Lawyers magazine where Shawn Holley talks about how that famous day when Kim Kardashian West and Shawn Holley went to the White House to essentially try to talk to Trump about commuting Alice's sentence. And she explains kind of how this started. Kim contacted Ivanka Trump, who, of course, put her in touch with Jared, who was the criminal justice reform point person. That's one of the hats that he wears in the administration. And so what they did before the meeting is they gathered up all of Alice's positive credentials, and they were impressive. She had hundreds of letters of support. She actually had a letter from the warden of the prison endorsing her, if you can believe that.
Wow.
And on top of that, all these certificates of all the classes that she took. And so Shawn Holley notes, in the meeting, there was Jared Kushner and an associate. It was Sean Chapman, Kim Kardashian West, and then White House counsel Don McGahn. And you know what?
Oh, by the way, if I remember right, he was not for this because of obviously blowback. You give someone a pardon and they go out and commit a crime. You get it's egg on the president's face.
It's a real risk. Yeah. So a week later, then of course the rest is history. Alice Marie Johnson was granted clemency. Now, did Kim Kardashian make that happen by herself? No. People had been working on this for years. Shawn Holley was sort of the legal team. She was interacting with some of the organizations that were working on the clemency. But because of Kim Kardashian West's high profile, she got that meeting and made it happen. And this is a huge problem. I mean, right now, there's 3,300 people who are LWOPs. 79% of them are in for nonviolent drug offenses. There's a racial component as well. 65% of those people are black.
This obviously is a problem. I mean, just the cost alone is a reason for major reform. But it almost seems like, how you have the parole board. I think we need something actually in between, that can go through these LWOPs and then do these kind of, hardcore deep dive inmate scrubs evaluations to see, how many more, Alice's are out there.
Well, that's really the thing is like, do you treat every convict or parolee as the same? And we know it's not one size fits all. Stop short of, we talk about wrongful conviction. That obviously that's a huge problem. You can't assume that everybody who's in prison is guilty, but let's look at, is their sentence proper for what they did? And you're right. There has to be we have to differentiate these people.
Yeah, I think even the one of the articles I was reading, the judge was even apologizing. He's saying, I don't have a choice. I think the state had a 3 strikes law, and he's mandated to put them away.
Mandatory minimums. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's something that's being reformed because it is handcuffing judges and juries to do things that are, quite frankly, too severe.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of gray area on this.
Right.
I mean, a lot. I was watching the Van Jones interview with Kim, the Rolling Stones Variety Criminal Justice Summit, and it really showed a different side of her. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I mean, you can tell she has a passion for the subject. She wants to do something. She does it. She's obviously not. You can't. I don't know if they can get any more famous than she is now. So that's not an incentive. But I think she likes reading the letters that she receives from inmates. Kind of doing a little bit of a scrub on those, and then passing them on to these different organizations that will scrub them further and find out what candidates there are.
Yeah, that's right. And, Van Jones said something, one thing you cannot learn is passion. And clearly, Kim, she's caught the bug. She was also talking in that video about how this was maybe a month or so after she went to the White House on Alice's behalf. She went to the California Institution of Women's Prison, which is in Chino/Corona, California. And she actually met with 15 of the women inmates. And, when she heard their stories, not every one of them was a hardened criminal who deserved their sentence or, the length of sentence that they got. And I think it warmed her heart to realize that, people can learn and grow even in prison. And at the end of the day, and this is my experience too, as I talk to the pro-per inmates, and I realized that, again, the humanity or the intelligence and the fact that a lot of these people are really good people who made one bad decision. And you know what? That could happen to you or I as well, But for the grace of God, we didn't have that bad decision, and we're not in that situation. Now, do we weigh a person's entire life on that one bad decision? That's really the central issue here.
Yeah, and I think that maybe is a good segue into maybe giving a little bit further breakdown on the First Step Act.
Yeah, so this was another, right after the Alice Marie Johnson, of course, there was a lot of talk about the First Step Act in D.C. So I believe it was in September of last year, Kim headed back to the White House, and this time is interesting. She had an interesting partner with her, Van Jones, who obviously is no fan of President Trump. But they were there for one purpose, and that was to advocate for the First Step Act. And so as they met with Trump, it came out that one of the issues, and you alluded to this earlier, is his concern about letting somebody out of prison who shouldn't have been out of prison, who then goes on to commit a crime. And so, again, the old guys, we remember this, the Willie Horton issue. If you remember in the 80s, in Massachusetts, they were granting weekend furloughs to certain prisoners. And Dukakis was the governor of Massachusetts. And this one guy, Willie Horton, was let out on a weekend furlough. He ended up raping this woman multiple times and assaulting her fiancé. So this really came back to bite Dukakis in his presidential bid in the late 80s. And there's no way in hell that Trump wanted, a situation like that. And I think
that also makes this, for him to get on board with this, I think more impressive, because for him, he had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And so I think it was pretty impressive for him to believe in Van Jones and Kim and in Alice, for that matter, to take the risk. Well, because there's no upside for him.
That's it. And then Kim and Van Jones explained that the way they tried to persuade him is, hey, listen, forget about Willie Horton. Your legacy, if you do this, is Alice Marie Johnson. Here's an example of someone who should have been out. So let's put all the right checks and balances in there, but let's not just not do this because there was a bad experience back in the late 1980s. So getting a little bit into the First Step Act, I didn't actually know this, but every letter in First Step stands for something. So it's the formerly incarcerated re-enter society, transform safely, transitioning every person.
We'll go with the First Step Act.
First Step Act. I could never say that again. This passed, obviously, late last year, December 2018. The bottom line gist of this is to give deserving prisoners the chance for a shortened sentence, give judges and juries more leeway in sentencing, and we're trying to, reduce recidivism. And as you alluded to earlier, cost reduction, because to keep somebody in prison, I don't know the figure per year, but it's scary how expensive this is to just warehouse these people who really maybe don't need to be in there and could be productive members of society, and rather than costing, could be contributing to society and paying taxes. So just a couple of the prongs here. More good time credits, and those good time credits being retroactive, so that when this act passed in December 2018, some people were released immediately. And I know you're going to talk about one of those gentlemen in a little bit. There's more incentives for participating in programs in the jail. More emphasis on pre-release custody for low-risk offenders. So in other words, halfway houses, alternatives to incarceration. Giving these people more classes while they're in prison so that they're ready for the transition once they do get released. And also some compassion for the families, moving the inmates to a facility that's within 500 miles of their family so that they can have more family time. And there's a couple other bullet points there, but that's kind of the gist of that. And so I just wanted to say that, so Kim goes to the White House for that, but she's not done with her political rounds. January of this year, 2019, she went to the California state capitol in Sacramento, and she was supporting the ballot initiative for 2020, the Free the Vote campaign. And so the idea there is allowing parolees to vote. So right now in California, there's about 50,000 people on parole who can't vote. And so if you're on parole, that means that you're a state prisoner, you were in for a felony, and you're now in parole as a transition to civilian life. So you're not technically an inmate. Now, you do one bad thing, they'll send you back to jail. And interestingly enough, California is behind many other states on this. They're less progressive than I think like 50% of the states. So, why is this an issue? Well, it goes to taxation without representation, and it potentially goes to voter suppression as well, because what is the racial component of most people who are on parole? They're probably black and brown, and so now you're suppressing their vote as well. Now, some people say, hey, why do I want these criminals voting anyway? Well, I mean, come on, let's look at the general population. There might be people we might say they shouldn't be voting either based on intelligence or, anything else.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's also, either way, whatever side of this you come down on politically, I think it's a good thing, because the more that you can do to make them feel like they're back in, for the ones that truly want to be back into society, is better for everybody. There's less recidivism. There's less, the costs go down. And so I think, one of the things that we can do as citizens is to vote. So the more things that you can, make them feel like they've been integrated and they're back into society, I think everybody wins. You know what?
That's it. If you don't like this for any other reason, look at recidivism.
Yeah.
If people get out of jail and they're still treated like they're inmates, how the hell are they ever going to integrate? If they end up at rock bottom again, guess what? They're going to do crime again. So,
well, actually, that's a really great segue, because it's not only the voting, but it's also housing.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that Kim really gets the big picture. I mean, take the case of Matthew Charles. He was the first prisoner released under the First Act. And he went out, and the story behind it is I think he's in Memphis, Tennessee. He goes to, kind of get his life going. You need a place to live. And no one will rent to him because he's got a felony conviction. Kim finds out about this, does a blast on her social media and says, anybody in Memphis, Tennessee that's willing to rent to, Mr. Charles, please contact us. And this is just all one more small block that you need to get back into society. I mean, if you don't have a place to live, you can't vote, what motivation? How are you going to feel?
Yeah, it's really good that Kim sees the big picture. And there's even more pieces. People get out, and then what? So she's helping in that. But then I always look at the front end is people who get in, and like preventing wrongful convictions in the first place, and that's the area that I work in predominantly. I do some post-conviction work, but the other piece of this puzzle is let's not get them in jail in the first place if they don't deserve to be there, or let's make sure that their defense is tight enough that they don't get these wacky sentences in the first place.
That's right. And once again, I want to say we're not really taking a political stand, but clearly the system that we have now is not working. And so this brings us back to why we're highlighting, Kim Kardashian West. So we've chosen her as one of our criminal justice warriors because she's taking her platform and she's trying to make some changes that I think is better for everybody in society. Not just the inmate, not for Kim, but for everybody. Everybody wins from this.
Yeah, you really have to look at this with an open mind. And I think the temptation you hear a celebrity gets involved in the case, they're like, they don't know anything about it. They're just jumping on the bandwagon and potentially something dangerous is going to happen if this person's released. But, just take the case of Alice Marie Johnson. There's some real reasoning behind her clemency. And, Kim didn't stop with Alice Marie Johnson. She's got some other cases she's kind of lending her voice to as well. And just real quick, another one that she was working on, and this guy is still in prison as far as I understand, Chris Young. He's about 30 years old. He's been in prison for 10 years. Again, he got a life sentence for a drug case, and he's in maximum security prison. And he's arrested for marijuana and coke. I don't think, again, that he's a major player in this drug conspiracy, but he was busted near a school. There was a handgun involved. There's, some enhancements there. He was offered a 14-year plea deal that he turned down, and he ended up getting life because he was a 3-striker, and he was arrested 10 times previously. Now, you kind of stole my thunder here a little bit, but the federal judge who sentenced him, he quit after this case, and he said, what I was required to do that day was cruel. I mean, he had to impose the mandatory minimum. And it's funny, this judge is actually now working in private practice trying to get Chris Young's sentence commuted. And he brought up the point, and I think we said this earlier, that a lot of times in these multi-defendant cases, the least culpable defendants, for whatever reason, are getting the harshest penalties.
Yeah, that's kind of goes back to my earlier point, is that we're not trying to say, hey, criminals should just be walking free.
Right.
But when you start to see situations, especially in sentencings, where a judge is stepping down and going to work on the defense side, clearly there's a problem and there's some serious reform.
Yeah, and again, going back to the holistic approach, let's look at Chris Young's background before he got busted for drugs. Single parent mother, she was a drug addict, in and out of jail. That's not Chris Young's fault. He ended up homeless for long stretches as a child. And, when he was 18, his brother killed himself and he was on his own. So there's certain conditions that led him into what he did.
Right. And then obviously, we could mention Kevin Cooper as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so yeah, obviously Kevin Cooper, the DNA testing has been approved first by Governor Brown and by Governor Newsom. And, who knows when that's actually going to be conducted.
We need to get you in there.
Yeah. I mean,
let us cover it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I see this even in lower level cases, like to try to get testing done from the defense perspective. It's very tough. First you got to get it ordered by the court, but there's still hoops to jump through and there's still roadblocks and there's who's going to do it and who's going to witness it and what are the parameters of the testing. So I don't know when Kevin Cooper results are going to come out, but Kim very vocally on social media advocated, for the testing to be done.
Well, maybe that's where we can get involved. We social media to Kim and we say, hey, you're a DNA professional and expert, and we'll do it for free. Just use your power and your platform to get us access, and we'll do the DNA testing.
Yeah, and isn't that the ironic thing is that, and it kind of goes back to Kim wanting to pay the rent. She wanted to pay the rent for Matthew Charles, but he still couldn't get an apartment. And it's kind of the same with DNA. I mean, it's not cheap to test DNA, but it's not as cost prohibitive as it was back in the day.
No, we hear that a lot. When we're working on our show, we hear, it always comes to the DNA, and it's like the simplest thing that you could do in the lab, in 24 hours. But for whatever reason, it's the biggest hurdle every time.
No, I have cases right now post-conviction where the family's like, yeah, we'll pay for the testing, but You've got to get it approved. You've got to get the evidence released. Everybody's got to agree. It's just, it goes beyond money and enters into the political realm.
Yeah, that's obviously another area, especially where we're concerned, that needs to be streamlined. There's no way. I mean, you have people. I mean, look at all these exonerations that are happening, and they have been waiting in prison for years for a simple DNA test. I mean,
yeah, and a lot of times that simple DNA test is really dispositive. It's like crystal clear.
Right.
Hey, there was semen from a rape case, was never ever tested. I mean, it's going to answer the question if we get a DNA profile.
That's right. I was reading an interview by Alice Marie Johnson's attorney, Shawn Holley.
Yeah.
She mentions that Kim Kardashian West has talked about wanting to become an attorney herself, and that she's always had an interest in the law and investigation. Obviously, we already talked about her father, so that makes sense. And Shawn Holley points out how extremely effective Kim has been in achieving justice for those in need without a law degree. And personally, I couldn't agree more. When she focuses her platform on a singular issue, I think anything is possible. And part of what we're trying to do with our show, Equal Justice, is to highlight the same types of issues, but what goes on now, and more importantly, what goes wrong before they ever get into prison and these situations are there. How the system is dysfunctional at the very start.
That's right, and it goes to sort of the work in the trenches that myself and some other independent experts do, just trying to give these people a fair shake. Where's that discovery? Are you sure about that DNA? Let's not just steamroll over these people. And it takes a lot of effort to kind of, get the type of evidence that the defense needs to make a fair case. So
we've talked about this many times, that this is where things, I think, really go off the rails, is those initial stages. You've talked about the power and the money behind the prosecution, and even some of the games that they played. And, I'm not going to incriminate anybody, but how all we're looking for is just a sense, and you've mentioned this, dozens of times, it's just a level playing field. And so at least at the beginning of the game or the trials is that everybody is on a level playing field, and it's just, you don't need $1 million out of the gate just to make sure that you get a fair trial.
Right, absolutely. So, hopefully there'll be some more celebrity attention on that. I mean, hey, any celebrities out there you want to ride along with me, go to Men's Central Jail, talk to some pro-pers and look at that whole thing about why people choose to represent themselves.
I mean, that's the definition of boots on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So, going forward, there's a large network of celebrity criminal justice reformers. So far, we've just hit Ice-T and Kim Kardashian West. But it seems like one of the common threads to these celebrities is Van Jones. And in fact, he recently launched a criminal justice reform organization and includes people like Meek Mill, who we'll be covering in a future episode, and Jay-Z. So there's many more warriors that we can cover in the future. And Dion, I look forward to talking to you about it.
Absolutely. Great talk.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.